Welcome back to season 2 of the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and I am so grateful that you're joining us. When I started this podcast last year, my primary goal was to normalize the experience of imposter syndrome, to make it easier for us to talk about, and to access the support that we deserve. I am so grateful to everyone who has shared their stories with me, and I'm fascinated by the linkages between imposter syndrome and so many other facets of our lives. The conversations that we had last season led us in so many powerful directions. I'm excited to continue these conversations in season 2. As always, if you have a story to share, please reach out to me. I would love to interview you. And if I can ever support you on your own imposter syndrome journey, I'd love to connect on that too. Thanks again for being here. Welcome, Steve. I am really excited to have you here today, and I would love to start by asking you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm real excited to share my story. I love your podcast, and it really drew me to contact you because I feel like it touches me in so many ways, and in some of the things that I've developed an awareness and a passion for over the last several years. So as a point of introduction, my name is Steve Friedman. I am 54, retired after 30 years in corporate America, and have over the last 5 years since retirement begun to really dive into introversion and what that means to me and what that means to so many other people. And so I'm excited to share a little bit of that because I think there's so many commonalities between imposter syndrome and introversion and overlap as well. So it should be fun.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about it too. I think this is a really important topic, and I think you're right. There's definitely overlap here that's worth exploring. And before we dive more deeply into the introversion side of things, I'd love to ask what I generally ask at the outset of these conversations, which is, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And how, if at all, has it shown up in your life or in your work?
So it very much overlaps with my introversion, and I kind of sensed it throughout especially my time in corporate America, that there were times and moments where I felt like, this just doesn't feel like it's me, like it's my authentic person, that I'm putting on a mask when I go to work and I'm pretending to be somebody else because I think I should be, because that's what everybody else appears to be doing. And then at the end of the day, I feel completely exhausted because I've performed this play during the day, which just took so much energy out of me. Where it really came forward was actually at my retirement party. So my retirement party, I had many people from across my 30 years with the same company, from very many different departments and roles. And so everybody, or a number of people, came up and shared their stories, and I shared some of my stories, and I shared, what were my plans going forward. And I said, well, really going to miss the work environment, but I'm excited to go home, spend time with my family. And I'm looking forward to writing, which is something I used to do when I was a kid. And so they asked, what are you planning to write about? And I said, well, my initial focus is about introversion, a bit of a memoir about my experience as an introvert. And I will tell you, the room went quiet and people started looking at each other. And suddenly a few of the people said, you're not an introvert. There's no way you're an introvert. We've had meals, we've talked for years, we've worked together. There's no way you're an introvert. And my first thought was, joyful glee of, I've pulled it off. I survived 30 years and nobody apparently really understood the flaws that I thought I had in myself. But over the days after that party, I really thought, man, what a missed opportunity for so many reasons. One, that just feeling like I was an imposter was a struggle for me for the vast majority of my career. And so hiding that really drove me down to the point where, in order to cope, I ate too much, I drank a lot, I worked a lot to try and make up for, what I thought were shortcomings in my approach. And my health was bad. I was overweight. I had shingles. I had rashes. I had sciatica. I had all these things. And my doctors would say, it's really nothing we can do because it's all stress related. And it helped me to really understand how much being an imposter, trying to be somebody I really wasn't authentically, how much that cost me. The other area that it really cost me is that I just realized afterwards that, and through some of the research I've done in the years since, that there's a lot of introverts out there. Depending on what you read, 40 to 50% of the people in the world are introverts, and that includes in the workplace. So I certainly was not alone, but I think I was joined by many other people who never wanted to divulge their introversion. And I think as a leader in the company, I had an opportunity to share who I truly was and help others embrace their own introversion and the strengths that they have, just like I was needing to do. But I missed that opportunity. And I just kind of took that and felt like that was something that I regretted, but it was in the past. And now what can I do going forward to try and help myself and help other people that are struggling with the same challenges that I had for most of my life?
It's so unfortunate that you felt that was something that you couldn't reveal, first of all, and second of all, own, right? That it was something that felt, like you said, like a deficiency in some way, right? And it speaks to imposter syndrome, that sense of not feeling like I belong, right? That there's something different about me that makes me less than the people around me. And corporate America, I spent a good chunk of my career in corporate America as well, is definitely geared toward the extrovert, right? Which is why you felt the way that you did. There are unfortunately so many people who struggle with that same sense that you're describing. And I wonder, you mentioned missed opportunities, right? Is there anything in particular that you think back on that you think, if I had it to do over again, I would do differently, or that you tell people who are in the thick of it now, as recommendations for how to cope with a lot of what you experienced?
Sure. I mean, I think it really, for me, and I encourage other people as well, it really starts with actually sharing that we're introverts with other people. And that's a really difficult thing for many people to do. But I think that if you get that monkey off your back, then suddenly you feel like I can feel like I can be more of my true self. And surprisingly, people understand that, because after all, half the people are introverts themselves. And generally, even the most extroverted person is not wishing for your failure. They might not completely understand, but they are, championing your individuality as well, for the most part. And I think while it's a cultural norm in the workplace, that I think that just sharing it opens up new dialogue and opportunities to get everybody's voice in the room. And what I've realized is, there were many times in my career and with people that I've engaged with since then that really understand that in order for a team to really work well and a company to succeed, you can't have just one type of voice in the room. We talk about a lot about diversity and inclusion, and that's certainly important in every definition of that. But this is part of that definition. And if we only have a bunch of extroverts participating in a meeting or a project, and the introverts kind of on the sidelines or pretending to be extroverts, then the results that we get are very skewed. And what we really need is everybody to participate in their own authentic way. And so, for introverts to bring their strengths, which oftentimes are things like preparation and thoughtfulness and balanced approach and evaluation, that those things need to come into the room to balance off sometimes the spontaneous approach that others in the room might have. And so I encourage people to have that conversation. One of the people I've talked to that has had that conversation came back and he said, I was really very nervous about doing it, but it was the right time and opportunity. And my boss is pretty open to having personal discussions like that. I shared it with him, and it has changed the way I operate and the way we work together at work. And so I'm excited about that. Although, I definitely, it makes me regret even more the missed opportunities that I had, but I just hope that other people might learn from some of those experiences and carve a bit of a different path.
I love that idea, which may sound simple, right? But I'm sure, like you said, it's difficult for people to do. It feels scary at the time, but the idea of simply sharing it, owning it, and letting people know, because like you said, I think there's going to be a good number of people that are going to say, me too, right? They're going to say, oh, thank God that you said it, so now I can too. And it creates opportunity to rethink how we engage with one another. There's so much of work that happens in meetings, that happens in these group settings, that really gives an unfair advantage, I think, to extroverts. And I am an extrovert, so I understand that. And it's something that I think, because I'm sensitive to introversion and the differences between extroversion and introversion, I try really hard to be mindful of how I structure meetings, or, am I talking too much? Am I creating space for people who maybe haven't had a chance to speak up yet? But I think there's an opportunity for all of us to rethink in fairly simple ways how we engage with one another in meetings in particular, which are so dominant in the workplace. And like you said, the ability to really get the best out of everybody when we do so.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your approach. And I think that's really important. And I think it can be brought to light. Some people, it's just their natural approach, but just by having the conversation one-on-one or in a team atmosphere or something can change the whole dynamics of the team for the better and help people relax more and be their true selves. But in my experience, the biggest challenge at the workplace is the introvert themselves. And in part because I think it's a bit of a journey. Life is a journey. Introversion is not just a state of being. It's not that, hey, we're an introvert and we're all the same, or we all understand it similarly. And I've done a bit of work on that, and I find that there's kind of a path that people go through in a lot of people's lives and time. I know certainly my own, I spent in this kind of first phase of being just unaware. I felt like I was a bit different because I saw people around me, friends, family, my siblings. One in particular was very extroverted, and on TV, and so I felt like, I wasn't sure what it was, but I just felt like I was different. And I was conscious of that. And over time, and this was as a little kid, and over time, I just think my self-confidence and self-esteem started to wane because of that. And my parents were, loving and supportive, but they didn't really understand it either. And so they kind of nudged me to go out and play with friends when I really just wanted to stay home and do my own hobbies. And over time, that kind of sinks in as well. Eventually, I kind of realized, okay, I learned about this label of introversion, and I thought that I connected with that, but I was still pretty uninformed. I mean, I didn't know what that really meant. And if anything, it really helped me to connect with the negative stigma of introversion. And so that was not very healthy sort of period in my life either, where I was like, well, I'm an introvert, and introverts are, loners and narcissists and antisocials and incapable of having that kind of conversation according to society and dictionaries and things like that. And so it really swamped me. eventually, and I think for me, it just, I don't know, took maybe some curiosity and maybe some maturity. And so unfortunately, it took decades for me to get to a point of sort of enlightenment where I said, I want to learn more about this. And I read books like Susan Cain's Quiet and other books and things like that to realize, well, introversion is not a negative thing. It's just a state-like extroversion, but there are many strengths, just like extroverts and everybody else have strengths and capabilities and traits. There are many that introverts have that need to be shared, and we shouldn't cower in the corner, but we should be proud of who we are. And getting through that period of learning usually is I think a quick process, because we're so excited about, there's actually light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a positive thing instead of this negative drain on our energy. And eventually, I think, we get to the point of being content or happy or even ambitiously take that those strengths and learnings and do amazing things that we never thought we could do and really couldn't do it earlier in life with a low self-confidence and that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, what I've found for myself and for many other people is that oftentimes people are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s before they get to a point of really embracing their introversion. So, I just would love for other people to perhaps hear the message and reflect and try and speed up their time on that journey, because life is short and we have a lot to give, and the struggle is long and arduous if we let it be.
I probably should have asked you this before, Steve, but because you mentioned that there are misconceptions about introversion that you experienced personally as an introvert, and that I'm sure extroverts feel or, sort of think as well. What's your definition generally of what it means to be introverted?
So, I will say early on, I took the definition of other people. I was not a good socializer. Shyness, which I've learned is not the same as introversion. Some people are shy, some people are introverts, some people are both. And to me, introversion is simply that, we all have this level of energy in our day, and people, and we all get tired as the day goes on. And how do we re-energize, whether it's during the day or at the end of the day? And there are some people that love to go to parties and have dinners with lots of people, and meeting new people is an exciting thing that really gets their energy up. That's not me, and that's not generally an introvert. Now, that doesn't mean introverts don't like to go out or have dinners out or meet people, but our energy tends to be reignited by some alone time, hobbies, reading, writing, art, can be any number of those things. And it may not take long, but that helps to re-energize so that we can go out and do the socializing or the debating at work or things like that. I think the biggest misnomer about introversion is that introverts don't like to socialize or can't socialize. And I think that's very wrong. I certainly would say I like to spend time with other people, but it tends to be a smaller circle of people for a shorter period of time in a familiar places. And if I've got that, then I'm excited and happy. I love to do those sort of social things, but I'm not the one that's going to be at the party for 3 hours and then hop over to the after party. I can put in a good 30 minutes, an hour, depending on who it is in the situation. And then I'm happy to move on and maybe go home and have a little bit of a re-energizing alone time.
That's really helpful. And I think we're all still processing these definitions and how they relate to us, whether we're introverts or extroverts. So it's good to break down some of those myths. Curious too, as you think back on your career, what do you wish, I'm trying to think of how to frame this, but essentially, what do you wish your boss had done differently out of respect for you, that maybe he or she wasn't aware of because they didn't understand introversion versus extroversion, or dismissed some of those things? Like what do you wish extrovert, especially extrovert leaders, knew and did differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I worked with at one company for 30 years, and I probably had, I don't know, 10 or 15 different managers. And so I worked for some really great people and some not so great people. And some of those were, I mean, my last manager, as an example, he probably was more in tune with my introversion than I was at the time. And so he took steps to kind of give me space, gave me time to prepare for meetings, to think through my position instead of, being at a meeting and throwing something out there at me that I was expected to make an analysis and a decision on the spot. Those are kind of difficult. So what really helped was preparing for the meeting, knowing there's a meeting coming up, understanding what the agenda was, reading through pre-read if there's pre-read, so I can be prepared. And other people may feel comfortable to walk straight into the meeting and just ad lib and go for it, and that's great. But for me, he gave me the space and time to be able to prepare. So I'd come in with notes and questions and comments and things jotted down, and so I could be an active participant and make sure that my concerns or my recommendations were voiced in the meeting. There are managers and people that follow that same approach, but quite frankly, there are others that don't, and so they don't provide that pre-read, they don't provide the heads up, and they don't really. It's hard to really fault them. There's no real fault there because in most cases, because oftentimes those people are just not aware of introversion and how to help those introverts on the team. Now, there are some people, I think, that are out there that just think that they buy into the negative stigma. And so they think that they don't really want introverts on their team because they want people that appear to be more confident, that can think on the fly, and that are, socialites and gregarious people that people want to hang around with. And they think that's an important part of their team and marks somebody as being successful. Those people are really hard to work for because they basically, as they get to know you, whether you offer up your introversion or not, they observe and they might see that you're not that extroverted socialite, and they think that you're not a successful contributor to the team. Those are pretty hard. And I would encourage them to really just kind of open up and think about diversity and inclusion in a broader way and how they can get better results for their team if they really encourage everybody to participate and make space for different thought processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's prime territory for imposter syndrome too, right? When you feel like I can't meet the expectations of the role because of who I am.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is so interesting that, the challenge, whether it's at work or at home for introverts, is both the society we work in and that other people will make space and not accommodations, but just help the other voices to come into the room. And it's also, a challenge for introverts ourselves to share and to make that space and to recognize that we are a positive contributor. And where you see both of those working well, I think that's really a strong environment, a team environment or a family or whatever the case may be. But where both of those are not working well, it can really be a struggle. And then people like myself kind of put a mask on and assume a facade during the day because it's just too much of a struggle to try and be ourselves. And so we try and be what our manager thinks we should be, or what I think the corporate culture is like. And frankly, I've encouraged people to, you either need to learn about yourself and your authenticity, and then put that forward so you can contribute and be happy and successful. Or if you don't feel comfortable that you can do that in that work environment, then ultimately I think you need to change work environment. Work is, 30 years, 40 years for 8 to 12 hours a day. It's just too much time to be wasted by trying to put on this mask and being unhealthy along the way.
I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes we forget that we have choices. And I don't want to minimize the fact that we're in the middle of global pandemic where, the economy has been impacted and it's not as easy to just go out there and find another job. But I do think it's important to empower ourselves to recognize if the environment that we're in isn't working for us, that we don't have to be held hostage, that there are other situations, other managers, as you've experienced, right? You're a great example of that, having experienced a wide spectrum of different managers. With the right manager, you can really thrive.
Yeah. So you're right. And so I think I wouldn't encourage people to give up too quickly. I don't think it's really giving up. I just think, we need to learn and share and stretch. And but we also need to find the right environment, whether that's, the team right next door or whether that's a different company or industry, in order to really fulfill our own purpose.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that too about not giving up too quickly, because one of my other questions for you is, you mentioned sharing, which I think is great. I think that's a really important thing that we should all consider. Beyond sharing, is there anything you would recommend to somebody who has a manager who maybe doesn't get it, who, let's assume that they're not actively unsupportive, but they just don't know enough to know how to better support the person, that, how to have a conversation with that person about what their needs are and how to better get support from the manager?
I believe a lot in vulnerability, and I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of us, including myself, and many people, perhaps men especially, but I would say many people in general find it difficult to be vulnerable, especially at work. But I think somebody has to take the first step, and the opportunity is ours to sit down and in the right environment, the right frame of mind for ourselves as well as our manager. Not necessarily in a room, a windowless room, but to have a walking meeting or have a lunch or a coffee and just share a bit. And it doesn't have to be sitting down and bam, I'm an introvert and I wanted you to know, but to just share some of the stories and experiences that you've had, and share some of the things that you've done in your work or in your personal life where you've use the strengths that you have as an introvert to better a team or to find improved solutions and things like that. And so, having that kind of subtle but relaxed conversation where we share may enable them to open up more and for the light bulbs to go off a little bit of, hey, that's really interesting. And I'm glad that you shared that. And I would love to be able to help in your journey for you personally, but also because I think it would help our team. And some managers are going to be more open to that than others, but I think it's definitely worth a try to have that conversation. And I think in many cases, people will be surprised at the response that they get back.
I think that's a great idea. I think for leaders listening too, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is creating space for everybody on the team to say more about their natural style, how they prefer to engage with people. The more to the diversity and inclusion piece that you mentioned earlier, the more that we understand what makes people who they are, right? How do I like to engage, and what do you need to know about me to best work with me would be so powerful in team building and building trust.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I did at work, and I think many organizations do this, is they'll administer a Myers-Briggs personality test, an MBTI, or a strengths quiz where people answer some questions to identify what their biggest strengths are. And I think that's such a great process to do as a team, usually, as the smallest size team you can, not a huge organization. But the part that oftentimes is missed is the discussion afterwards. So they might administer the test to the team. Everybody gets their own individual scores with a little bit of a piece of paper that tells them how to interpret that. And they go off, and most people might throw it away, and some people might read it themselves. But the power really is in, let's sit down as a team and share what the results are and what does that mean to us. And so that's another way to open up the conversation about introversion or many other personality traits or strengths that other people may not know or may have misinterpreted in the workplace. And you have that conversation. And then I think that the next phase that is enabled by that conversation is for teams to say, you know what, now that we understand that these are some of your strengths and these are some of the things that you're not really excited about, and we do that for everybody, then maybe we need to adjust some of the work tasks that we're doing. Because certainly if somebody is doing more of the things that they have a passion and an interest in, and less of the grueling things, then that's great, especially because other people on your team might love the things that you don't like. And if we rebalance and just know who the kind of subject matter experts are within the team and funnel more things and grow those roles for them, then again, I think it's a much more productive and happy team. And really back to the discussions on the results, the more the teams I've worked on that have been the strongest and most enjoyable to work on are the ones that share and they're vulnerable and they understand each other in a more personal way. And I think that, but it's generally comes back to the manager has to be open to that discussion and open to being vulnerable with the team. But if they do that, the benefits are usually, significant.
Yes, I love that you're using the word vulnerability. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I also agree on the personality assessments too. I think that's a great way to have this conversation, to normalize it and to give everyone common language. I think that's a really great strategy. I'm curious if you have had any conversations with other people or any thoughts on navigating a virtual environment as an introvert, now that so many are working outside of an office. I think in the beginning, there were jokes about how this is an introvert's dream, right? But I imagine there are some pros and cons to that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and timely, obviously. And I think that when people think that it's an introvert's paradise this past year, I think it's actually, there are some aspects to it that might be true. We're spending more time at home in smaller groups, obviously. That can be enjoyable, but especially in the workplace, it's actually more of a challenge in many ways. Contrary to popular myth, at work, our favorite thing is not to just sit there alone and talk to people on the phone without having to sit down face to face. We generally appreciate more intimate relationships with smaller groups of people, and it's hard to do that on the phone. It is easier to do that face to face. I enjoyed having one-on-one or four people kind of coffees or meetings where we could really talk and understand each other's approach. It's hard to do that now, certainly on the phone. So I would encourage people to have not only the Zoom meetings, which everybody is having these days, but to approach those in the same way that you would a face-to-face meeting pre-COVID, to think about the agenda, read the pre-read, make sure there's pre-read for significant meetings, to prepare just like you would have before. And one of the ways to prepare for meetings pre-COVID was to sit down with the meeting organizer, or if you are the meeting organizer, to sit down with some of the most important people in the meeting, whether they're allies or people that might come with a different opinion, and sit down with those people and just kind of bring those topics to the forefront and have conversations where oftentimes you can diffuse the issues. Well, now that's really hard to do. So I would encourage introverts in particular, but everybody, to have Zoom coffees. We're just the two of us are just gonna call up and a very informal conversation, and we can have those prep meetings and discussions in the most comfortable way, as opposed to just relying upon the phone call or the big meetings that follow. So it's not easy for anybody, but I think we can still make it work if we think a bit creatively.
That's great advice. I think you're right that ability to informally connect
Mm.
is still very important. And a lot of people are hesitant or anxious about it, but we all have an opportunity to face that fear, right?
Yeah, and I think it is a bit more challenging for introverts because our natural tendency is I really don't want to go to that party. I don't want to go to that meeting. I just want to stay home and I want to um, do my own thing, my own hobbies or my own work tasks and things like that. That's our natural inclination in many cases. And we have to push ourselves, sometimes not too much and other times quite a bit in order to get out and stretch beyond our comfort zone and go talk to people and meet people. Well, during COVID, it can be easy to say, it's just too difficult. This is a messy situation. It'll be over soon and we'll go back to normal. So in the meantime, I'm just going to pass on all these conversations and enjoy my comfort zone. But we really need to kind of push ourselves to have those conversations, and we can still have the personal, intimate conversations that we liked before. If we don't, then and we wait until whenever COVID is over, then a lot of those relationships will have really broken apart or never really got started because we didn't foster them in the way that we feel most comfortable.
Great point. This has been so interesting, Steve. I'm really, really grateful that we've had this conversation. And just to wrap up here, I have a couple of questions for you. What motivated you to want to have this conversation? What are you hoping people will take away from it?
We talked a little bit about it, but the more I've spent time kind of thinking about it, and I've written a book and have a blog, which I'm happy to throw up my website. But the more I've engaged with other people, I've realized that people are on this journey at various different places. And I'm trying to kind of share my message and experience and see if I can help other people, inspire other people to recognize where they are and accelerate their own path so they can become the strong people with voices in the room that they all deserve to be in their own way. And so, and certainly in listening to your podcast, I just feel like there's a lot of commonality. And so I think it's an opportunity to reach out to people that may have some of the same struggles that I've had.
I'm really glad that you're doing what you do. I think it's so needed right now. And I will link to your book, your blog, anything that you're willing to share with us in the show notes so that others can take advantage of those resources as well.
Sure. That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah. I started my website a couple of years ago and have been real excited about how it evolves. So I put a blog out every week. I have a quiz so introverts or anybody can take the quiz to understand more about their strengths. And I'm having a work leadership quiz coming up here in January. And I've also tried to gather other introversion and self-help resources and put them on my website. So if people are looking for other podcasts like this one, and others or books that might help for their journey, that they have a place to go to find those that I would recommend. And so the website is www.beyondintroversion.com. And happy to have people just kind of check it out and let me know what they think or if they're looking for more information.
Steve, thank you so much for being here and thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. I'll certainly extend the same thanks because I think this is a great podcast that is connecting with so many people that need to hear other people's stories.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.